What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering. An interesting story coming out of the Jon Stewart show. It's called The Problem with Jon Stewart. You may or may not have heard of it. It's on Apple TV, and Jon Stewart is pretty much washed up anyway. Now, Jon Stewart has had some good opinions in his past. He's not all just kind of like woke idiocy. He's one of the rare few that will occasionally call out his own team. And in this particular case, it looks like criticizing China, and perhaps AI has led to the termination of his show by Apple TV. Of course, we all know where Apple phones are made and the power that the Chinese manufacturing juggernaut has over the United States economy, because cheap stuff. Everyone's got to have a brand new iPhone every year, right? So it looks like Apple ended Jon Stewart's show because he was going to criticize China. Shame on Apple. We have rigorous free speech protections, but they don't hold up to corporate greed. Right, so I guess my next phone will be an Android. Snagging Jon Stewart to host a new political talk show after his departure from The Daily Show was one of Apple TV's biggest achievements when The Problem with Jon Stewart was first announced back in 2020. But ahead of production kicking off for the show's third season, Stewart and Apple have reportedly parted ways over, quote, creative differences, and the problem is coming to an end. The New York Times reports that along with concerns about some of the guests booked to be on The Problem with Jon Stewart's intended discussions on artificial intelligence and AI were a major concern for Apple. Though new episodes of the show were scheduled to begin filming in just a few weeks, staffers learned today that the production has been halted. According to The Hollywood Reporter, ahead of its decision to end The Problem, Apple approached Stewart directly and expressed its need for the host and his team to be, quote, aligned with company views on topics discussed. Rather than falling in line when Apple threatened to cancel his show, Stewart reportedly decided to walk. Now, I have to give him credit for that, 100%. I grew up watching Jon Stewart. Now I look back at some of his monologues as kind of cringy, but it was a much better time in late night television long before his lackeys, Stephen Colbert and others, got their own shows and really revealed themselves to be massive establishment shills. At least Stewart would, stick it to the left's absurdity at times. And I've always given Jon Stewart credit for his work in terms of the first responders in New York. And various other things. Sure, he's a leftist lib, TDS suffering, standard kind of Hollywood fare guy, but he has had occasionally some good takes. The Times doesn't detail what about the show's planned coverage of the artificial intelligence and China prompted Apple's executive leaderships to butt heads with Stewart, but considering how pointed critically is a part of what ultimately made The Problem with Jon Stewart a hit for Apple TV Plus, and maintaining a cordial relation with China is crucial to Apple's future plans for growth. It doesn't come as a shock to see the show hit the chopping block in this manner. Well, I mean, this is the problem, literally the problem with the quartering here. Ultimately, it's a major problem in this country that there are only two major phone, producers or services, really, Apple or Android. It's another huge problem that their marketplaces are massive gateways and creating monopolistic control over new technology. We see this in the way that they, for example, moved so swiftly to remove Parler a few years back, in the way that they artificially suppress competition for their own services, like the way they suppress Rumble and other new tech video platforms, because it doesn't serve Google, Android, the Google Play Store, in any way, shape, or form to make it easy for competitors to come in. And what's interesting is, you see here in Salon, it was inevitable that Apple would have The Problem with Jon Stewart. I mean, sure. We are truly living in strange days when one can suggest that Jon Stewart might, and this might be a very flimsy might, find more welcoming employment terms the company's whose primary source of revenue is not related to phone, computer, or tablet sales globally. Only he and the people close to him know whether he's interested in going down those avenues. All that the rest of us know is the problem with Jon Stewart is finished on Apple TV+. According to the New York Times, where the story first broke, Stewart's decided to end the show due to creative differences over proposed topics and guests for the upcoming season. Now, what I'm curious about is who the guests were. Now, Jon Stewart has plenty of money, so again, I definitely respect him choosing his own, creative powers over, bending the knee. Quoting an insider, so the former host of The Daily Show told his staff that Apple executives were particularly concerned about the show taking on China and artificial intelligence. Stewart and his staff also predicted they'd face more pushback as the 2024 presidential campaign season accelerated, another source said. With the likelihood looming, Stewart bounced, and it's hard to blame him. I also suspect he knew this impasse was inevitable. When Apple announced it was moving into the original content business back in 2019, it reportedly threw a vast sum of money at A-list creatives to supply original content for its iPhone and iPad customers. The company brought Stewart into the field 6 years after he signed up from The Daily Show, which he hosted for 16 years. It's hard to picture Stewart agreeing to produce a topical talk show for anything less than complete editorial control. Stewart consistently reminds people that he isn't a journalist, despite demonstrating the type of interviewing tenacity and prowess that many reporters could learn from. But at The Daily Show, he was a part of a company that also owns CBS, which has a long history in television news business and understands the ethics of keeping business concerns separate from its newsroom's editorial choices. Apple, in contrast, is a tech company whose CEO Tim Cook was reported by the Wall Street Journal in 2018 to have been very hands-on in terms of deciding the suitability of its streaming services content. If that isn't the case anymore, Apple still prioritizes the tech side of his business, demonstrated by Cook's unexpected visit to China earlier this week. China is Apple's third largest consumer market after Europe and the Americans. Those concerns were always going to be on a collision course with Stewart's application of inquisitive skepticism to, say, the problematic, repressive policies of a certain Asian superpower. The problem with Jon Stewart could have chosen to ignore China, but for how long? That nation owns nearly $860 billion of United States debt. It's a major trade and manufacturing partner and influences our politics to a significant degree. Most of the newest iPhones are in fact made there. China is also a major American entertainment consumer whose audience can make or break a film's global success at a box office. We've seen this with Hollywood. Over the past couple of years, Hollywood has repeatedly pandered to the Chinese market. And now, really, for many years it worked for them. But now, after China has decided to freeze out many popular American film franchises in terms like whether it's Disney or Marvel movies, where it was like a free $200 to $300 million in China for such a long time, those days are gone. Now, they've alienated American consumers by pandering to China, and now China has turned their back on them too, which is why you see so many modern big blockbuster films that used to be shoo-ins for $900 million, now barely reaching 600. That's because they don't have China. That's just a fact. Regarding the AI question, again, Apple is a behemoth in the industry focused on automated efficiency. In no universe could Stewart deliver an honest report on the subject while working there. But with the mainstream news covering it more frequently, it would not go unnoticed if he were to skip it. It would be simple to lump the problem with Jon Stewart and with other short-lived topical talk variety shows as another indicator that the format doesn't work on streaming, but this cancellation is something else. As tech companies increase their hold on the news and information space, of which the problem with Jon Stewart was a part, we are seeing more examples of people who run them exerting control over the flow of information. This was a major concern when Amazon founder Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post a decade ago, and until recently stayed out of its newsroom no longer. Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, which has since been renamed X, was followed by the senseless smearing of public trust, such as NPR, PBS, and Canadian Broadcasting Company, and the BBC. Misinformation runs rampant on X. Journalists are abandoning it ahead of the election. Well, didn't the BBC and the New York Times knowingly publish false information about a certain conflict going on in the Middle East? The fact of the matter is, the mainstream media spreads to a larger degree, to a further, has a bigger impact when they run quote unquote fake news than any individual expressing some sort of conspiracy theory. Perhaps more relevant to Stewart's situation is the example set by Netflix in 2019 when it preempted an episode of Hassan Minhaj's Patriot Act that criticizes the Saudi-led war in Yemen and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from streaming in Saudi Arabia. At the time, the company said they were simply complying with local law, but humanitarian and free speech advocates feared the company's decision would leave a chilling effect. Well, understand this too. Hassan Minhaj is a huge liar. He made up all of the situations in which he uses as comedic act. His entire shtick is that he's a brown guy in America and he's faced all sorts of racism, when in fact that is completely untrue. He got exposed not that long ago. As of yet, it's unknown whether Stewart will set up shop at another network. I mean, would Warner Brothers Discovery be as thin-skinned as Apple? It regularly puts up with Last Week Tonight, John Oliver hosts, calling it business daddy, in proximity to jabs like, I do get the vague sense that you're burning down my network for the insurance money, but I'm sure that will all pass, and doesn't blink. I don't really care. I have to agree that I don't use streaming to watch like really on demand. I watch on demand, but I don't watch like weekly shows or nightly shows on streaming. I don't think Jon Stewart really has anything interesting to say anymore. I think he said it all. But I guess kudos to him for standing up for his morals. And I guess that tells you more of what to expect out of Apple TV.